Hello, I'm Shani Taragin, and I have the zchut of teaching Torah in Eretz Yisrael, and this is 18 questions for 40 Israeli thinkers for 1840.
So we'll begin where we always do. As an Israeli and as a Jew, how are you feeling at this moment in Israeli history?
Wow, it's really you're catching not just me, but I think all of us at a very critical time. And I don't just mean still in the midst of this war and conflict and polarization in Israeli society, but particularly, as you know, I can't even just say this week, but the past few weeks and Be'ezrat Hashem, the upcoming weeks, with this true dialectic of being an Israeli in the sense of wanting to fight for security, for national identity, for survival, for every single member of Am Yisrael, for hostages, for our chayalim, and personally also my own sons and son-in-law, and at the same time as a Jew, and I really don't see them as and separated at all identity-wise, one from the other, as a Jew, also knowing the halachic values and the tension of knowing that there are now hundreds, soon thousands of terrorists that have been released. So there is a sense of both, as every single person I think in this country is feeling, a certain sense of, can't even say exhilaration. Every time we see a hostage release, I think it's more a sense of relief, a sense of homecoming, a sense of everything that we've been experiencing for over 400 days has been so awry and so contrary to our values, and to confront, it's hard to say, people, an organization, and who completely disregard the values that we have of life and meaning of life, and to be engaged with them and to think about what we've lost, and at the same time a little bit of what we've gained over the past 400 plus days. I think there is a constant dialectic and struggle. Whenever people ask me lately how I'm feeling, I find that I just instinctively clutch my stomach, because that sense of both foreboding, the sense of a fear, the sense of the unknown is so strong that it affects every fiber of my being. But I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone.
What's that like to hold so much?
Oh, so I think we're a people, and I mean that Am Yisrael as a whole, that holds so much all the time. And by that I mean we hold thousands of years of history. We hold thousands of stories of pain, of oppression, but we also hold exhilaration and salvation. I'm just thinking, even over the past few weeks, I remember saying Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid with my nephew Noam in the hospital in Rambam, and crying as literally we're saying the word Tafachta Misbedi L'Macholi. He was wounded in Lebanon, and now he is walking on crutches and smiling, and we hold so much of that all the time on a personal, on a national level, that I feel that on one hand we're used to it and this is our story. On the other hand, as we know, just emotionally, psychologically, it's not always so healthy to hold these strong emotions simultaneously. And we're constantly, I would say, juggling emotionally and functionally, right? We still have to function. We still, Baruch Hashem, have a lot of Torah to teach, have a lot of people to impact upon. And I find, and this is what I tell others as a reminder to tell myself, that amidst this struggle and amidst this conflict, we have to take many nishimot for our nishamot, that we need to literally breathe. And by that I mean pause and reflect, and make sure that we're thinking through, and make sure that we understand issues at hand, and make sure that we don't just get caught up in the moment, because that is a danger, just to look in a myopic fashion of what's in front of us, but to look at the past, and that gives us and provides us with a tremendous amount of resolve and resilience to continue for the future. And personally for me, I really do. I use these moments of pause and reflection to think and to project to the future. And I know, it's not just a belief. I know that the big picture is beautiful, and it's that big picture that personally keeps me going, and a picture that I try to inspire and definitely broadcast to others.
What do you think has been Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in the war against Hamas?
Wow. Our greatest success is somehow, I think, as Rav Nachman Breslov says, even, behesei hadat, to see the tremendous yeshuot. And by that I mean to see the strength of this generation that I guess we have to take a little bit of credit in helping to raise, even though we say that a lot has definitely fallen through the cracks and there's a lot to be worried about in terms of the technological age and, the TikTok generation. But look at the emunah, look at the strength, look at the gvura, look at the empathy, look at the, I'm going to say, the achdut of Am Yisrael. There is nothing that provides with a greater sense of strength, with a greater sense of purpose and inspiration than looking at Am Yisrael and the success of the love and the brotherhood. And yes, I'm realistic, and I know that there are also protests and also a tremendous amount of divisiveness, but the plastic nature of so many people and leaders and activities and teachings, I feel something that I haven't felt. I love hugging my students and people that I know, but something that definitely has transformed, and I know it's not me, is the sense of I want to hug every member of Am Yisrael, because we know that we need that chizuk, and we're all going through this together. And every time I sing Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, I still tear up, even though, and I never did, I'm going to say, before Shmini Atzeret, before October 7th, because we really feel the sense of brotherhood, and that in itself is a success. What do I feel is one of the greatest failures? On one hand, I find myself not wanting to go there, almost like, the Berdichever. Do I really have to see the failures? Do I really? But I think we do if we're going to repair ourselves and strengthen ourselves, and we have to take a look, obviously, at what we have to fix. Maybe because I'm in the moment right now, I think one of our greatest failures is listening to a minority voice. And we know there are think tanks that have done studies that have shown that it really is a minority voice of paying such a heavy price for lives of hostages. Just to know that there are now thousands of terrorists with blood on their hands who just want to regroup and lead and teach greater terrorism. And right now, in the here and now, that's a mistake. That's a tragedy. I'm not saying that it's not worth lives of our own to return, but that fear. I live in Alon Shvut, and I pass by Beit Lechem and Beit Shala, and to know that there are more terrorists on the street that now are living knowing that they're freed for taking away other people's lives. I try, for the past many months, I try not to go to, the worst case scenario, not to go to my sons who are out fighting. I try not to think of what could be in a negative sense, only in the positive, but it's very difficult in the here and now not to think about that.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask because a lot of, I think, the tone just very early on in our conversation is a lot of optimism and a lot of an uplifting spirit. But as you just mentioned very briefly with in terms of what you viewed as the greatest failure, there is a like kind of the other side of that coin that there is danger and risk. And I think for different segments of Israeli society, it's manifesting in different ways. How do you hold both of those things together, and which do you find usually dominates?
So that's an easy question, because I think everyone has to know themselves. And I know that when I focus too much on both the fear, the foreboding, the pessimism, I know that it thwarts my growth. It sometimes even it numbs me, both my thoughts and certainly my actions. So I even try not to go there, even when we have to be present and we have to think critically about the current situation. But I know in order for me to continue to get up, to not only build, but to function in a positive way, I always go towards the optimistic side and option. And I think, and I don't know if, everyone is different, but I know myself, and I know also from speaking to other people that when we remember the tikva, right? We say it, we sing it all the time. Od lo abda tikvatenu. So let's show kaveh al Hashem. I know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is out there for us, looking over us, with us, holding our hands throughout all this. I can't not be optimistic, and especially I think because I teach and I learn and I study and I share the words of Tanakh and Nevi'im, and I see them literally coming alive and unfolding before our eyes today, so that even when I see all the negative, I have to share with you that lately, if maybe at the beginning of the war, I was thinking much more about Zechariah, Nacharit HaYamim, and every stage that he describes, literally, of Magefa, of a worldwide pandemic, and war, and then the last stages of Geula. So now I'm thinking more of Amos, who's a very terrifying Navi, who tells us about the very harsh decrees of drought and fear, really a terrorizing psychological fear that's always going to accompany us, and is certainly meant to teach us that we have to rethink both our social transgressions and iniquities, and obviously Ben Adam Lamakom. And then I think of the last few psukim of Amos. I imagine him standing in Tekoa during a time that he sees the breakdown of society. And then he sees, and I really picture him looking and seeing the hilltops of Efrat and Gush Etzion, and from Tekoa you can see 6 out of 7 of them. And he doesn't know when it's going to be. He doesn't know if it's the next generation or in the 21st century. But he says, I can see that you're going to build here again. And I see that v'lo yinatshu od mi'alat matam. You're never going to leave again. That Hashem is going to plant you here and keep you here. And even a Navi who's so harsh, he sees the optimism, because both on a personal, but definitely on a national level, he knows that that's what keeps us going.
Does that
That's what keeps me
optimism
going.
not reinforce, I should say, does that optimism give you hope in the hostage deal and the exchange? Meaning, because on the one hand there is like a different vulnerability that your community has in Alon Shvut, but on the other hand there is also that balance, as you're describing, of a kind of maintenance of optimism.
Definitely. Again, I think that we have to hold that optimism, because if we only think about the fear, then we're gripped with a constant anxiety, and we know psychologically and emotionally it really is not only difficult to function individually, but to interact with others, to build, to create, to even fix the status quo. So yes, it's even in the darkness of everything that has been transpiring over the past few days and weeks, I look at the light. I have to say, what gives me hope is, yes, I love looking at those reels of the hostages returning, of them being embraced by their families. I turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a tefillah and a bracha every time I see them, and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like they're now, v'shavu banim l'gvulam. Now please do this on a broader national level and bring everyone from Chutz La'aretz. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we know the trajectory is a beautiful one. So I'm just getting a little impatient, I think, but on a broader level, yes, that optimism definitely sheds positivity on even the current dark situation. And I think about how this could be good, whether it's the fact that on the world scene, albeit other than North America, no one has really come out publicly to recognize the inequality of this exchange. But it must every Yerida, hopefully, Litzorach Aliyah.
How have your religious views changed since October 7th?
Religious views in a more, do you mind if I ask, a social realm, in my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu?
Let's say both.
Okay. I'll start with Ben Adam Lamakom, that's
Between yourself and God.
myself and God. And that definitely, my tefillot, my prayers have been much more focused, much more, I find, even conversational with God. I find that I've been speaking, I think I was always God conscious, and feeling the presence of Hashem on a constant basis. But definitely when so much is going on, at the pace in which it's going on, and literally things changing from night to day. The discovery of Oron Shaul on the morning of the hostage deal, just remarkable manifestations of Hashem in our life. So I see, I feel, I think we all should, but I personally feel much more engaged with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and much more engaged both through prayer. I find that I have much more to say and to daven for, to pray for on a national level. I think in terms of basic, even not just mitzvot, ben adam lamakom, that obviously we're always working on this relationship, but more the depths of ourselves. I think that there were so many times after the first few weeks of fighting after October 7th that I would go to, whether it's the Kotel, Kever Rachel, literally crying with Am Yisrael, feeling a stronger relationship as a whole, as a people with God. Sometimes turning to God and saying, God, I don't understand. What more do you want us to do? And thinking more, and constantly thinking to myself, what does God want from me? What does God want from us? So that question that, would definitely resonate here and there, I think reverberates in my consciousness on a much more constant basis. Socially, I think it's night and day. By that I mean I love Am Yisrael. I love people. I have a hard time, disengaging from people, panim el panim.
Face to face.
Face to face, that's right. I'm not so communicative in general, over social media, but that sense of so many of us as mothers of soldiers and even people that I don't know, you just feel a greater social connection, a greater national social connection, and even those in the diaspora, I feel we're all in this together. And if you're all in this together, then you look out for one another. And whether it's paying Shiva visits to so many people and just wanting to give, you just want to give, and a sense of wanting to provide strength because you know that that's what's going to ultimately, in a symbiotic way, strengthen you. I think these ties and these relationships that we've been building really have fostered a greater sense of camaraderie. And I'm waiting for you to ask about different sectors in Israeli society, so I won't. But even amongst those that you would think that we wouldn't necessarily relate to as much, still, especially those living here, we're all affected by what's going on. So there is a sense of just common, I'm going to say, not just the common history, our common story right now.
Has your faith been challenged?
So interesting. Because if you would have asked me this 3 years ago, I would have said, I definitely have gone through different religious crises, at different stages of life. But generally, let's say in the more formative years of university. But interesting that no. If anything,
Did that surprise you?
Now that you're asking it, I can imagine that this war has challenged, and I know through speaking to people and having many questions coming my way from students and from friends who are, I would say, who are not only questioning but feeling very challenged in their faith and religious convictions and trying to understand their own pain, the pain of others, trying to understand what's going on and what we should do, what God wants from us. So perhaps because I feel this sense of not just responsibility to give strength to others, but I feel that what's going on, again, if you study Tanakh and Jewish philosophy, this should strengthen our commitment to God and our belief in our past and present and future, and so many manifestations of the miraculous expressions of God that no. That's why if I responded with a little bit of a shock, please forgive me, that no, I don't find that my faith has been challenged. I find that my faith, if anything, has been strengthened, and definitely has forced me to think about how to formulate certain expressions of faith.
Such as what?
Such as, and I just mentioned this yesterday in teaching Shmuel Aleph Perek Yudalet, the war of Shaul and Yonatan, ultimately against the Plishtim. And Shaul is afraid. There's 600 soldiers of his, and there are thousands, Kahol Hayam, of Plishtim. And he has an opportunity. You would think, okay, his faith is challenged, but Shmuel HaNavi has told him HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be with him. And he has so many different ways of communicating with God, and he doesn't take advantage of them in the sense of he decides not to frame the military victory, of which he is very anxious and nervous about. He doesn't frame it through God. Whereas Yonatan, his son, who doesn't have the same vehicles available to him, he does frame it. He has such faith and commitment and tries to inspire his companion as well. And I feel that that's exactly what we're all witness to, but what we're also all players in right now. Exactly as you're saying, Shirley, we all have that choice of whether we see God as part of this picture. And if we do, then how do you not have faith that this is part of a broader plan? Obviously, God is waiting for us to make certain choices. I'm not sure we're making all the right choices, but I think that by asking ourselves, what do we think God wants from us right now? Strengthening our commitment to mitzvot, strengthening our bonds with one another, strengthening our sense of unity, then we're framing this whole period of history.
Which choices are those that you mentioned that you don't think we're making the right ones about? Briefly,
So
and then move on to another question.
So again, with regard to, again, I'm going to say, almost caving into the pressures both of the world and certain voices of releasing so many terrorists. That's, I'm wondering right now, what's HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinking? And obviously, as religious Jews, we think about this also through the lens of halacha. And we know that there are different approaches. Rav Ovadia Yosef, who would say that, yes, obviously, Pidyon Shvuyim, but I just heard Rav Hershel Schachter speak about this as in a time of a Muhammad mitzvah. And
of a war that's commanded.
Exactly, commanded war, that the rules are different, and you have to think not just of the immediate dangers, but of the long-term dangers, of which they're not so much a doubt. They're pretty known what these type of people are capable of, what they've done in the past. They haven't shown any sense of remorse, and what we basically know. We've opened up a Pandora's box of the loss of future lives of the Jewish people, and it's hard to imagine that that was a good choice for the sake of the Jewish people. But again, let's definitely strengthen ourselves with that hope and that happiness and the optimism of, as I said, those reels of those hostages returning definitely provides a tremendous amount of strength. And here's a very good example of when I see them, I turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and I say, Hashem, look how much we care for every single nefesh, every single soul of the Jewish people. So God, in that zchut, in that merit, please protect us against any potential harm that we could possibly have. So I think even the challenges have to be accompanied with a lot of turning to God. So if anything, it hasn't weakened my faith. Even these moments of crisis and confusion have strengthened our recognition that God is in control. And again, we have that choice of framing both these choices and the situation and this time period in history. We can frame it as godly, or we can decide not to.
I want to switch gears a little bit to a different topic. What do you look for in deciding which Knesset party to vote for?
Oh, wow. I think what
You're welcome
most
to share
people
which
look
one you
for.
vote for, but we're asking more.
We're very Israeli then, if I share my
You're welcome
political
to.
affiliations.
Our interest is specifically in the considerations you have about what you're looking for.
So I think most citizens, when they vote, think to themselves both what's best for the nation as a whole, trying to calculate all the political considerations, but also want to vote, and that's what voting is in a democratic system, to vote for the values of the party that most stands and reflects my personal, national, and religious values. So even if they don't share all of my religious and national values, but I look for which ones are, definitely that dovetail the most with my values.
Which values are those?
Those are religious values of not necessarily religious coercion. I want to clarify, but people who are sensitive and are committed to the religious nature of both, I'm going to say the state of Israel, but also to religious Jews, and recognize that that should be respected. And part of the founding of the Jewish state wasn't just on national values, but national religious values. And therefore, that the leaders should represent. When I think of leadership in Tanakh, of kings who are going to listen to their accompanying court prophet. So the leaders who listen and respect religious leaders, halachic leaders, and at the same time that align with my national values of definitely looking out for the betterment of the Jewish people, Jewish identity on a national level.
Meaning what, like specifically?
Excellent. Like even an idea of, the chametz in the hospitals, that I definitely understand that idea of, free choice, and why not, allow for anyone to, in a hospital setting, in a public government building, why not, allow for people to bring in their chametz, but to remember that part of even Jewish nationalism means to preserve what's unique to the Jewish nation. And something, I wouldn't necessarily say all the time, all kosher food, but something that represents the beginning of national identity, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, the first month of the Jewish calendar, the entire Passover holiday representing Jewish identity, something like that, just to stand up for those values and to demonstrate our uniqueness. So I do look for that in the leaders.
Which is more important for Israel, Judaism or democracy?
Personally, I think when you say Israel, I don't just think of the state of Israel. I think of the people of Israel. I think of the Torah of Israel. And I think that that's one of the many messages of the Torah, that Judaism comes first. And even though we hear stories throughout the Torah of the value of democracy, even the famous story of Korach, who rebels because he wants democratic values, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, look, I have nothing against democratic values, but God said that I'm both the king, the political leader, my brother Aaron, the religious leader. Then all of a sudden you open up Sefer Devarim and you see the divestment of powers, and you see much more of a democratic system. Judaism comes first, meaning the mandates of God come first. And the very fact that Torah is given even before we have a state, so to speak, before we come into the land, shows us that the religious values even precede the national values, albeit it's so clear from our covenants and the promise that the ideal of the Torah, the ideal of Judaism, is to exist in a land. But yes, Judaism comes first.
Should Israel treat its Jewish and non-Jewish citizens the same?
When you mean the same, you mean equal rights and responsibilities?
I'll let you interpret it how you'd like.
So if you mean the same in terms of equal rights of voting, right, meaning Jews and non-Jews, then yes, meaning in not only a democratic system, the way that political systems work right now is that anyone who is a citizen has certain rights, and those rights shouldn't be denied by the government, but those rights don't exist independent of responsibilities. So responsibilities also means paying taxes. Responsibility also means defending the state and being willing to give up your life for the state. And responsibility means looking out for the betterment of the future of the state as a whole. And that's why, as I mentioned, I think obviously of religious values, that I also think of broader issues of okay, if right now, religious citizens are not necessarily the majority, I have to think of what is the best way to promote religious values within the infrastructure in which we live. And we can't, just be, I'm going to say, in our own bubble of identity. We have to preserve our identity and our own values, but be willing to not just listen, feel responsible, really one for the other. Again, both Jewish, non-Jewish, and we live one with the other. That's why Yirmiyahu Hanavi says, especially when you go to Chutz La'aretz, you're going to be living amongst others, Bishlomo yeh lishalom, that when they're at peace, then we're in a better state of peace as well. So if it means undermining our values, then we have to think twice about it. But to offer rights and responsibilities, I think that's not only an equal but a just way of living. There was always in the Torah status of ger v'toshav.
So is there, you're clarifying specifically with rights and responsibilities, is there a different segment of what you think citizenship entails that should be different between Jews and non-Jews?
Excellent question. I think that in terms of rights, should Jews have greater rights in the country? Well, right now, there are certain laws that already reflect that. The law of return, and obviously, so many of the fine print is open to interpretation. Do I firmly believe that there should be different rights for Jews in the country? In the state in which we live right now, I think it's very difficult to say that. I think that if you provide rights for only part of the citizens, then that causes a tremendous amount of, and I don't want to go as so far as to say apartheid, but that is part of the argument, and that's what I think is so phenomenal about Israel, that we offer so many rights too. I don't just mean health and social services. And I when we attended our oldest son's medical school graduation, majority of the class was actually Arab, because they lowered the standards of acceptance in order to make sure that they have a right for their academic degrees. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to go see an Arab doctor, but I appreciate that as a country that Israel provides these rights. I'm going to focus a little more on the responsibilities, though. That I think we're forgetting about that there are responsibilities for non-Jews as well that live here. If you choose to live in a country and benefit from the rights of that country, then you have to understand that there are responsibilities. And the Torah mandates this, even for Gerim v'Toshavim, and they're not the same, but anyone who lives in
Gerim and
this
Toshavim
country.
refers to like a halacha categorization of people part of the Jewish state, just for our audience who may not be familiar.
Excellent, right? Those that decide to accept certain both cultural responsibilities, certain commandments as well. Those that live and don't accept, but they still benefiting from the rights of the country, also demonstrate responsibilities of maintaining peace and order, responsibilities of respecting Jewish citizens in the country, respecting the values of Jewish citizens, responsibilities, again, I think of fighting for the basic survival. The very fact that, just think about this, that Arabs are exempt from fighting in the army because we're afraid of what affiliation they're going to place first, I think that in itself demonstrates that they're not fully taking upon themselves the responsibility of what it means to live in a country, to believe in the existence of a country, to fight for that country. And rights should not be automatic. I think that's a very laissez-faire perspective, and one that generates in Hebrew we say a magia li personality, that everything just comes to me and I don't have to work. And a country that provides or allows for a lack of responsibility, I think is one that doesn't have such a strong future. So we have to work on that.
Now that Israel already exists, what's the purpose of Zionism?
Oh, okay. Also, good question. You don't have to put in all my comments in between, but um, Zionism today, meaning the ideology of seeing Zion as the home of the Jewish people. I think that there are still hundreds and thousands of Jews throughout the world who, albeit don't necessarily relate to the religious values of whether it's Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, of understanding that this is an ideal and part of the redemptive state of the Jewish people, or who don't believe in the religious nature of the Jewish people living in the land of Israel with all the commandments that we're provided with and at the same time commanded to fulfill here. There still is a basic sense of ideology that this is where the Jewish people belong. And I hope that the Zionistic spirit is still strong amongst all those. I'm going to say especially those that are unaffiliated. I think more affiliated Jews, you're right, they definitely have a sense of, okay, Zionism is a little outdated. We don't need that ideology because our religious convictions are strong. And I'd love to believe that that really is the case. I hope that certainly in a few years we should get to a state where we all do say the ideology has expired because the religious understanding and the religious identity is so strong in Jews both in Israel and throughout the diaspora. I hope that we come to that state very soon. But in the meantime, I think the Zionistic spirit still has to exist to inspire those who are not fully affiliated.
Do you think all Jews should live in Israel?
Yes. There, I said it. And yes, yes, I really do. And are you ready for a diatribe? Okay, so I think it's very clear from the Torah itself, and I don't just mean going back to the time of the patriarchs and all the promises of Hashem to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the covenant, the Brit Bein Habtarim, the covenant of the land, that this is where your descendants will be. And obviously, as a nation coming into the land, living in the land, being exiled from the land, all the prophecies of return to the land, the promises themselves are indicative of an ideal. And the ideal is whether it's Vanidachim, Me'eretz Ashur, that all those who have been exiled to all the corners of the world should come back. Whether it's the cries that we revisit on an annual, I'm going to say, even more monthly basis of the tears of our mother Rachel, who is crying for her children to return. Yes, and there are two ways of returning. God says there, either to return from an enemy country under duress or to return to your borders because you know that this is your national identity. So it's difficult for me to understand how people believe that Jews should be living in a country other than Israel during a time when we clearly can be living in the country. Obviously, I'm not, not disparaging any of our ancestors who are living in times of oppression and times when not only did we not have autonomy in the land, but we didn't have the ability to fulfill commandments in the land. We were living under constant oppression, and even with the dangers today, of which I think there are so many more benefits than dangers, and especially recognizing the dangers that exist throughout the world today, perhaps even more than we were sensitive to over the past generation, then I think it's clear that this is where the Jewish people belong. So when you say this every once in a while to people, so I do say it more than every once in a while, then they say, but who's going to be left to teach all the unaffiliated? Who's going to be left to bring back everyone else? So I really do think there are two solutions. Everyone should come up and live in Eretz Yisrael, yes, with all the rights and responsibilities, both on a political basis, but all the more so. Can you imagine then, according to the Rambam, we can go back to fulfill basic mitzvot of the Shemitah years and Yovel on a biblical level. And that's not just the ideal of the mitzvah observance, it's the ideal of the Jewish people coming together, demonstrating not only what Jewish unity is, but what Jewish values are all about. And albeit we can share those messages when we live in France and when we live in California, when we come together as a people and imagine, we're already on the front page of newspapers today with Latov or Lara, depending on how they broadcast, for good or for bad, but we represent certain values. When we come in as a people, we broadcast those values, then it's clear what the Jewish people represent and how we can inspire the rest of the world. So back to all those who may not come. So hopefully, when they see majority will come, then they will as well. In the meantime, there are, there are outreach organizations. I always say Chabad will be there for now to bring the last ones back. But even when you turn to people on the street, really a Jew, a basic Jew who doesn't have, such a background, and you ask them, where do the Jewish people belong? You open up Tanakh, you open up the works of halacha, right? And it's clear the Jewish people belong in the lands of Israel. So I try this every once in a while, and I ask them, so why aren't you here? So everyone has what I call their own excuses, and many of them are, really, I understand, elderly parents, please, I am not putting that down at all, and I understand reasons behind it, but one has to recognize that there should be an obligation and an affiliation and a responsibility that should be in abeyance, above our heads at all times, recognizing that the ideal is for the Jewish people to live in the land of Israel, and I should do everything that I can to get to that state. Whether it's, I don't have a job, in Israel, okay, so get to work. Or whether it's, I have elderly parents, okay, so make sure that your children go to Israel so that they don't get stuck with you, but you'll make Aliyah, they'll take care of you when you're in Israel. So when people say, and either there are various reasons for why they're still outside of the land of Israel. So sometimes they also say, we're waiting for Mashiach. So this is my favorite one, because then I can say, that's the worst time to come. When Mashiach comes, not only will the El Al flights, you think they're expensive now, just wait till what they'll be then. But you think real estate is expensive now, this is the time to invest, because once Mashiach comes, definitely much more difficult. And I don't think that we should be a passive people. The Gemara, the Talmud speaks on various occasions on how the process of redemption can come. And we have that choice of whether, as we see even from the stories that we're reading now in Shmot, we have a choice of whether we're going to be passive and then let God take care of it, or whether we're going to be active participants in our redemption. So I truly believe in the latter.
Is opposing Zionism inherently anti-Semitic?
I think today, yes. Meaning I think that everyone understands the ideology of Zionism, that the Jewish people have a home in Zion, in Israel, is a basic aspect of their identity, again, of our history and of our future. And anyone who's anti-Zionistic today is basically saying that they don't believe in basic aspects of Jewish identity.
Should Israel be a religious state?
In an ideal setting, I open up the Torah, and that's clear that it should be following all the laws, all the what we call the mitzvot hatzliot ba'aretz, the land-oriented laws. And yes, as a state, meaning we see not only on the governments and not only on the leadership, but yes, it's a responsibility of the land itself. You said it beautifully, right? The state should be a religious state, meaning providing that infrastructure for keeping the religious commandments.
What does that look like for you, a religious state?
It looks like, to a certain degree, what Rav Goren, I think, tried to establish the foundations of, wherein there is, firstly, the reestablishment of Sanhedrin, where we have a Jewish corpus of law, and that would be nationalized, and you'd have to, meaning you'd have to follow the laws that are established by Sanhedrin, so that you don't have all these different fringe groups in society, but rather there's a sense of an authoritative corpus of law. And the goal of that really is so that we're following one Torah, one instruction, and therefore, whether, for example, what Rav Goren wanted in the realm of kashrut, of dietary laws, that the kashrut be nationalized under the Rabbanut Harashit, which was almost a pseudo-Sanhedrin. You definitely see that that's what his goal was as he built his own Beit Medrash overlooking Har HaBayit in the shape of, the semicircle way that they used to sit. So to have one kashrut, meaning a standard of what's considered kosher and not considered kosher, can you imagine? No matter where I go, whether it's to Haifa or whether it's, down south to Dimona, that I can just eat not only in every supermarket and restaurant, I can eat in everyone's house because that's the standard that is established in this country. It also, Shabbat, I know that, I'm sure you're familiar that there were many attempts, Rabbi Yaakov Meidan and Ruth Gabizon, to try to even standardize certain aspects of Shmirat Shabbat to minimize the amount of desecration of Shabbat. So the very fact that there are secular leaders and religious leaders working on this already today definitely inspires me all the more. But I think that the ideal would be a state where, and public transportation obviously wouldn't run in a religious state. Anything run by the state would allow for full observance of Shabbat. What individuals do, they want to desecrate the Shabbat and bear the consequences. That's, individual autonomy. It looks a little bit like what it does now in the sense of, Hanukkah, the entire country celebrates together. The Sukkot, Pesach, and remarkable, you feel during Chol HaMoed, the entire country is off at the same time. So that same sense of, I don't just mean the traffic and everyone battling to get to the same national parks, but that sense of really of camaraderie, that sense of unity, that sense of exactly what many of the times of the year are for, but on the day-to-day, that also means obviously the court system, and that means that the educational system will have supervision to provide a strong religious infrastructure.
Should that be pursued now?
I think that,
Meaning, because before you had mentioned about the being against Jews or Israelis as a passive people, and
that's right.
so, but you had earlier mentioned about a resistance or a hesitance towards changing certain aspects of the state. In an ideal world, if you were announced prime minister with full control over everything tomorrow or today, so how would you balance those two things, or see them coming in this situation?
Yeah, so I don't think I would do this overnight. I see it as a process, and I do see it as a process that I personally would like to see more of implementation thereof. I think, though, it has to start with education. I think that, the Hasmoneans try this, right? They try to really convert everyone and say, okay, we're going to have a theocracy and everyone has to convert and everyone has to subscribe to our religious strictures. So even though that's one way of doing things, we know that that's very short-lived and definitely not long-term successful. So I think that we're living in a remarkable time where we can inspire and educate and reach people that just geographically we weren't able to educate before. Baruch Hashem. Thank God there are so many resources available. And now's the time to train and inspire more educators to not just teach properly, but to live properly as role models. The more it's fascinating. Also back to just what this war has accomplished, that the secular youth is now interacting so much more with the religious youth, and the mutual appreciation and respect and curiosity. How many people put on tzitzit for the first time, and not in any coercive manner, but again through education and inspiring and putting on tefillin. And the more that we can educate, meaning that would be, yes, if I was in that position, I would start with education. Let's educate towards, firstly, Torah values. And part of those Torah values, okay, there are certain commandments, there are certain responsibilities, there are commitments that we have. And the more that we educate, the more not only curious, I think you're not going to have what we call, a total buy-in all the time, but there will be a greater sense of understanding. I think that's how I truly do see how we're going to get to that state of religious observance. Obviously, we are going to need at some point a Sanhedrin just to be able to incorporate those laws in the day-to-day. But I see it as a process that begins with immersive education.
If you were making the case for Israel, where would you begin?
Do you mean in political arena as opposed to academic arena.
However you understand the question. The audience hates when I say that, but I like to give the
Okay.
guest free reign.
So I think that this very much, firstly, maybe that was a segue, the previous question, but definitely, underscores what I just said. I think it starts in the classroom. I think the case for Israel, you see these youth who don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes I want to tell Ben Shapiro, like, you can talk all you want, and you can try to educate, by literally going into Oxford, but that's
But as a point of education in the content, where would you begin?
I would begin with if I'm making the case amongst a secular audience.
Sure.
So I would begin with common values. I mean, that's instead of otherwise they'll always see me as an other, and they'll see me as imposing my values and my ideas and my identity, on them. Let's start with what rights do people have? How do people identify themselves, right? I really would. I would start in a classroom. How do you identify? Do you identify boy, girl, Caucasian, as, I don't know, Japanese, Chinese, based on your ethnic identity, based on your religious identity, based on your gender identity? And hopefully people recognize that everyone has a right of identity. And even though we have multiple facets and expressions of our identity, the question is, which one do you hold as primary? I place my Jewish identity first, before my political identities. Again, which means that my political identity is somewhat subordinate to my Jewish identity. And even my gender identity becomes defined by my Jewish identity. And I think that once everyone realizes that we all identify ourselves, so now we respect each other's identity. And once you respect, I'm a Jew, I want you to understand, again, my Jewishness, then I would, without telling them even my Jewish values, I would ask them, what values does your identity provide for? And okay, let's respect each other's values. Do people have a right to their ethnic identity, their religious identity, their national identity? Well, at that point, they'll realize that anti-Semitism, I think people, when they think about this, they realize it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that every other religion, every other people have a right to identify based on their ethnic association, their religious affiliation, and they hate Jews for doing that. So that's where I would start. Obviously, there are many, manifold layers of
A lot of ways to build the
education.
curriculum.
Yes.
Can questioning the actions of Israel's government and army, even in the context of this war, be considered a valid form of love and patriotism?
I think so. I think it's dependent on how you do that. Meaning, if you, I think it can definitely still be considered patriotic to speak against certain ideas, as long as, again, you still feel a sense of responsibility. Meaning, it always bothered me, but all the more so during this war when people say, well, we disagree with this war, so we're not going to serve in the army. Now, that already undermines patriotism. So to speak against certain decisions, I think that that's part of what a people is all about. That's part of what being a thoughtful person is all about. I think we also have a choice how we broadcast our critique. I think that personally, and maybe this is part of the expression of the optimism, but personally, I think that more good always comes from channeling, meaning instead of just undermining what we dislike, to try to create greater infrastructures of what we believe in. Meaning, if you don't like what the country is doing, so yes, there's a value in demonstrating, there's a value in posting a social media post to say otherwise, but I think that there's much greater value and effect when we try to build off of the positive and create more positive, meaning I can convince you that there's, the famous black dot in the middle of the white page, right? Yes, I don't like that black dot, but I'd rather, instead of just highlighting that black dot, I would rather try to build more of the white. I would try to focus on that and let people see the positive, build the positive, and the more positive that you build, it really does help diminish. Meaning, if that's my voice, then I find that it helps quell a lot of the critique and a lot of the, say, even the negativity around us.
What do you think is the most legitimate criticism leveled against Israel today?
Well, it depends by whom. Again, you hear criticism from all different countries and segments of society. What do I think is the most valid critique? I'm afraid that if I say this, then maybe I myself am transgressing, slandering my people.
Well, you don't have to agree with it entirely. It's
That's exactly it. Right.
relative to
As
the
we
others, it's the
said,
most
no, we
valid.
definitely have to give thought to this. And I keep thinking, is that something that my initial thought is just I hear shouts of, anti-Semitic nature. So obviously trying to think of critiques of others against Israel from other countries, right? That was the phraseology that I most agree with. I'm going through the list, right? Israel is, again, barbaric. Israel is killing too many Azan citizens, right? All I keep thinking of is we're the most humane army. We are fighting the most difficult war, trying to keep as many people alive. We're cutting off humanitarian aid. We're giving so much humanitarian aid. Okay, I'm really struggling with this one. A critique. I'm thinking they should be saying, right? Remember at the beginning they said, okay, like fight this war, go in and go out. But then they put so many restrictions, meaning I agree that I think this war could have been fought in a more comprehensive, much more an offensive manner. But in the end, that same critique was, no, but you have to do this slowly, gradually. So at every stage, I even hear different voices, different people against Israel. I don't know, maybe I love this country so much that it's hard for me to even think of a critique. You're very
It can even be
patient.
from within Israel or more
Yes, it can
generally.
be
Because
from within
the
Israel.
question in its strictest
Isn't
is
that something
the
I
most
heard?
legitimate criticism leveled against Israel today. So it didn't say from whom it's leveled, but
Okay.
I mean, you mentioned before that briefly about how the war was conducted, but that wasn't
Yes,
comprehensive or quick enough as
exactly. So perhaps that meaning there definitely are citizens within the country, who feel, and I feel very strange. I think most of the critique that you hear, both on the streets in and outside of Israel, is about how this war is conducted. I feel, very, I'm going to say katonti, very humbled by the fact that, I trust, I guess, the military leaders that they're making, good decisions along the way. That's why I feel it's hard for me to criticize, even from my own children. I've heard, okay, we don't understand why they did this, why they did that. I do think, okay, if we just want to focus on the war for now, then okay, and then there's something else that I'm debating whether or not to raise, and maybe that's part of my reluctance right now. But so firstly, in terms of the war in general, so obviously, I personally have a critique. I would much rather it have been much more comprehensive from the start, much more offensive, much more, and I would say it should not have dragged on, for already as long as it has. So that definitely is a critique that you hear from many, meaning why did we have to go through this for so long? And this is perhaps part of the course, but what I am thinking, but I'm reluctant to raise, is obviously the distinction in society between those that have been fighting this war and Haredim in society who I so love and respect, and I just have to say it hurts. It hurts to the core that even I'll be honest, family members who have said to me, if we could, we would send our sons. And it's because of the religious leadership. And I understand that. Really, al pi halacha doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to go out to war all the time. But what Sanhedrin used to decide, who would and who wouldn't, just a sense of, I wish more Haredi leaders would come out and help change the trajectory that I really think could catalyze the continuation of the unfolding of redemption. And we need those religious leaders to come as a force. I know that there are individuals, I don't want to mention them by name right now, who said that of course they believe that Haredim should both learn but also contribute, and definitely during this Muhammad mitzvah go out and fight. And they said, but if they say that publicly, then they will be completely disregarded by the rest of the Haredi world. So to come together as a group, to come...
So you actually prefaced our next question was going to be, should all Israelis
Do you see
serve...
how reluctant I was
Yeah,
to bring
and
this
I
up?
appreciate you sharing it. I think it's helpful for our audience and for people to hear from the difficulties some people have in praising and criticizing and different parts of it.
Okay.
But our next question actually was, should all Israelis serve in the army?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because we spoke about rights and responsibilities. And yes, now you're going to argue not everyone is an Israeli citizen, or if you're living in this country and you're receiving rights in this country. But definitely, I think beyond Israelis, I would think that if we spoke about religious identity, Judaism, and so many mitzvot relating to going out to war and understanding the responsibility of a Jewish people. So we're not just talking about, to expand our territory. We're talking about literally saving lives. And I know, my married son and son-in-law are now about to start their 5th round of Miluim. I have a son-in-law who has served for, almost 200 days in the army. A son who was definitely much more in the north than he was in Shari Tzedek emergency room, over the past year and a half. And I think that he could be saving more lives if someone else was on the Syrian border. And yes, I think it's part of our religious identity and part of our religious responsibility, and definitely part of the national identity.
Do you think the state of Israel is part of the final redemption?
Yes.
That
was quick. That countered
my... I will ask you to say a little bit more about that, if that's okay.
Yes. So, and I think, firstly, I say it all the time, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. So why do I believe that it's the beginning of the final redemption? So again, opening up the prophets, we see that the first stage of redemption is kibbutz galiot, is the ingathering of exiles and the establishment of autonomy, of sovereignty. That's exactly what, if I go back to the previous Shivat Zion, the return to Zion back in 535, that Jeremiah had prophesied about 70 years earlier. So that's exactly what the prophets say. We're going to come back. We're going to also rebuild the temple, rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, but you're going to have the restoration of sovereignty in the country. And so that's what we have. And we have it. It's remarkable how it's unfolded almost in the identical way as it did going back literally 2,500 years. If then they came back in 535 and they didn't have complete sovereignty right away, they established, as we know, Darius allows for satraps, and they tried to rebuild the temple, and it took 19 years until they were able to at least establish the foundations of a temple and have a beginning of the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. If you fast forward to 1948, it really was almost the exact same phenomenon. We tried to rebuild Yerushalayim. Unfortunately, the Etzel, the Lechi, the Stern Gang, everyone's trying, the Haganah, and it fell to the Jordanians. But in the meantime, we have the establishment of the State of Israel, and exactly the same way, 19 years later, we have the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, exactly as Zechariah had prophesied. So it's hard. I think it's very hard to deny, and you open up the writings of Rav Kook, and it's so clear, he writing before the establishment of the Jewish state, how that's what's going to be necessary. We're going to need that infrastructure of political sovereignty in order to be infused religiously as well. He said as much as it would have been wonderful had Zionism started really as a religiously oriented ideology, or had it started with religious values, so that would have been wonderful. But even starting it in a political, secular way, and then infusing, and that's why I truly believe that the next stage is the furthering of that religious infusion through education, through the values. Then, and that's how I try to live and build. Then, certainly, to bring this to the next level. I will say that I think that it's remarkable as well that not only did 19 years go by between reestablishment of statehood and the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, but if you think back, one hump in the way, or one decline in the process, of which there have been many, but definitely the disengagement from Gush Katif. I don't think it's by chance that 19 years after the disengagement, it's time to at least start the process of returning.
Is Messianism helpful or harmful to Israel?
That's an excellent question. I think it is meant to be helpful, I think both in terms of providing a sense of direction, in terms of knowing that we're not in the ideal state right now. There is definitely what to strive for, and obviously that's supposed to motivate us and recognize that we should never be content with the status quo. But we have goals and we have values and we have a religious vision that is meant to not only bring us closer to God, but meant to bring a greater sense of the immanence of God into this world. So even as I say it, aren't you inspired? Meaning that's Messianism. However, when people get caught with the goal without paying attention to the means or the process of getting there, or again, if that ends up causing people to undermine values, other values of Judaism, then I think I don't want to say it could be dangerous, but as any positive view that we have, right? I have a goal and then there are means to the ends, and the means don't always justify the end. So obviously we're supposed to incorporate proper means to reach that end of a state of the Messianic era. But we're not supposed to incorporate, I'm going to say values that, or lack of values. We're not supposed to undermine, law, and we're not supposed to undermine
What are you
ethics. I'm thinking of people who and perhaps believe that, yes, we should just, kill everyone to get to this messianic state, or, bomb the Temple Mount in order to start rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. So, and no, I don't think that that's the way to get to that state. I think, and we have to, through proper, and by proper I mean Torah-based values. And part of Torah-based values means, yes, sometimes it doesn't mean that everything has to be, a dialogue and a negotiation. I think you already know that. I don't think that that is always the means, but means that are aligned with Torah values, with ethics, with consideration, and with both religious ideals that don't disregard human life.
Do you think peace between Israelis and Palestinians will happen within your lifetime?
It's a tikva, it's a hope. I think that maybe I believed it more a year and a half ago. But after October 7th, I hope I live a really long time. Bezrat Hashem. And you know what? I'm not going to dismiss it, really, even now. And maybe it's my, again, optimistic personality that saying this, but you've seen, if someone would have told you, think about this, 10 years ago, that we'd have peace treaties with the Emirates, and I just had to fly back from the States on Emirates. And I was thinking, what type of world am I living in where, the stewardesses, are dressed, in a way that I'd be, generally I'd be scared to engage. And now these are our friends, and they recognize how advantageous economically it is to have these friendships and alliances with Israel. The Saudi, who thought, remember Saudi Arabia, one of our strongest enemies, now in negotiations with Israel. And by the way, October 7th hasn't undermined, maybe stalled, but they're still, very optimistic with regard to peace treaties with Israel and Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to keep the Palestinians on the table. I am. You never know. Maybe they'll wake up. Maybe, this is my optimistic voice, saying they're going to wake up and realize that Hamas, and I do believe, you know what, I'm going to requalify. If you want to even just cut out the first part of what I said, I'm going to sharpen it now. Yes, in the sense that I think Palestinians under Hamas leadership, there's no way. And because Hamas, it's not just about not recognizing the state of Israel. Their entire charter is about destruction of the Jewish people. So I truly, as long as Hamas is in power, there won't be negotiations. There won't be any possibility of peace with people who want to kill you. However, and I think it is our responsibility to annihilate Hamas, and if we do so, then I hope that the Palestinian people will recognize that we value human life. We, the Jewish people, value human life, and that they should give themselves a chance to value their lives. And value life means also the quality of life. And I would hope that they would want a greater quality of life that provides for economic growth, educational, intellectual growth, that provides for opportunities of healthy leadership and also communication, with the world, and playing a more beneficial building role on the world scene. I would hope that if they didn't have demagogic control, and if Hamas didn't have this control over telling people what they should believe in, hopefully they'll believe in these values themselves. So yes, I am hoping that it happens in my lifetime. I think that it is a possibility. And here, once again, instead of placing the burden on them, let's take that responsibility upon ourselves, meaning let's destroy this really monstrous vehicle of evil. And if we do, then hopefully they'll see all the good that we have to share with them.
You referenced before about Gush Katif, which was Israel evacuated in 2005, and then the hopes of resettling it now. And obviously, there's definitely like a strong movement in Israel now of many who are hoping that Israel will take that step. Given that doesn't seem to be the case of what is going to be happening next, is that something that you find discouraging? Something that you have somehow incorporated into your view of hope?
So I already said this over the radio, so I guess it's okay to say it again. When our son went in as a Rofei Lochem, our oldest son, on October 8th. So I told him, I said, Usher, when you go in, look on the Mediterranean coast for some nice real estate, to invest in. Because, again, that optimistic view of, I think we should resettle there. I'll even add the word now, eventually. I think that that's the only way that we're really going to secure our western border. I think that the past 19 years, but all the more so, the past year and a half has taught us that every attempt that we've had to provide every economic investment and security investment to allow for the Palestinian people to grow there and not harm us has been sabotaged, again, by them. So I think that we need to have a presence there. So albeit, you're right, it doesn't look like for the short term the Israeli government nor, the UN peacekeeping forces have any plans of allowing Jews, Israelis to settle there. It doesn't damper my optimism. I've learned through this war that I have to be a little more patient. I realize I'm a little impatient, and not just, if you use the term already, the Messianic process. I think part of my personality, I see something that could be done, that should be done to further, whether it's Torah, whether it's Torah values, Jewish identity. I We want to already start building it and help it grow and thrive. So sometimes I am impatient in general, and this war really has taught me to be a little more patient, that it's a process. And we don't see, both from a divine perspective, the big picture right away. That sometimes we don't even see the fruit of our efforts right away. So I don't think we should take it off the table. I just think that, okay, this is stage one. Let's stay firm to that vision and see how we can help further it at, honestly, perhaps a slower pace than I'd like, but definitely for the future.
Where do you identify on Israel's political and religious spectrum? And do you have any friends on the quote unquote other side?
So the answer to the second question is, I don't even know what you mean by the other side, but I have friends on all sides. And I think that it is important to have friends on all sides. I'll even share with you that before October 7th, we have friends who are Arab, who have basically built our our house, and Gush Etzion, most of the infrastructures there. There is an Arab builder who I taught the laws of mikvah to, because he was building a mikvah, and just fascinating to see that. After October 7th, he didn't reach out to me, which I thought was strange. I didn't reach out to him. But I know you mean more the other side within the Israeli political spectrum,
And religious spectrum.
and religious spectrum. So the answer is yes, yes, yes. And because friendly means
And for you,
receptive,
where would
and
you say you are politically and
so that's
religiously on the
exactly it.
spectrum?
So that's a more complicated question, because it really is relative. If I tell you, I'm to the right, there are many people more to the right than I am. If I tell you, I'm center, I don't know, center is also extremely subjective. I don't think
Do
I
you see
would put
yourself as center?
myself in. So I was just going to say, I wouldn't put myself to the left, again, religiously or politically. Some people would see me as center. My husband is probably laughing right now, and he would say, Shani, you're one of the most right-wing, people that I know. But again, it really is relative.
Yeah. And religiously?
Religiously also, right? Relative, meaning there's so many terms. And I will say, I don't like these labels. I never like these labels. I know that we need stereotypes just for reference purposes, but I think that they put us in a box, and they limit us, and they limit our relationships with people. And I don't know if you hear it in my tone, but I'm very much bothered by these terms. Religiously, I say I'm a halachic Jew, a passionate halachic Jew.
And our last question, and this is something you've touched upon throughout, but it's always a good note to end on. Do you have more hope or fear for Israel and the Jewish people?
Always hope, always hope. And it's based not only, again, in the optimism, it's based on what I've seen in the Jewish people, particularly in this generation. Really, the love, the support, the remarkable. Think of, again, just the heroes and the heroines of both, soldiers, hostages, fighters, chesed coordinators. And that's why I turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and I say, I'm not sure, what else HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us, but I know that we're in that process. And obviously, I think our commitment has to be stronger. I think our love one for the other has to be stronger. Maybe it's our hope that has to be stronger. And every time I think of tikva, so on one hand, I think, obviously, Od lo avda tikvatenu, but I think also of Mizmor Chaf Zayin, that we stop saying right before, Shmini Atzeret, of Kaveh El Hashem, Chazak v'yametz libacha v'kaveh El Hashem. And I just hear that resonating again, over and over again, that yes, you know why I have hope? Because I know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has hope in us every morning, even those really difficult mornings when you don't want to get up, because you know that right after you daven, you're going to open up your cell phone and you're going to see Hu Tar L'Persum, and you're going to be very disillusioned and numbed by depression. And going back to the original question, that's what I think about, all of the mothers of the past who, I think of Yocheved and Miriam. I've said this a lot in the past year and a half, when they woke up in the mornings and they saw hundreds of baby boys, dead on the Nile River. And yet they got up and brought more life into the world. They got up and and Miriam was able to see from afar. And Rav Nachman Bresla beautifully says, he says, like Avraham Avinu on his way to sacrifice it, his only beloved son, Yitzchak, he saw from afar that I have hope even during those difficult days, even, a day like today, because I started my day, on one hand, yes, we know more opposition and unfortunately, hard and harsh news. At the same time, you go to the kotel, hundreds of people davening, singing Hallel, Kavel Hashem. That's what gives me a lot of strength and hope, knowing that we have this in our DNA to get up and to keep bringing life and to keep engaging, keep catalyzing this process of redemption, doing everything that we can with the right values. So even if we don't see it right now, to not lose sight of that rachok, knowing that rachok is going to be really, really beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for answering 18 questions. How was this for you?
This was phenomenal. I think we should continue with at least another 18 more.
At least another 18. We'll go straight.